Ciao ragazzi! In this tutorial I will show you how to get from this to this in Adobe Lightroom. Alright guys, this is a picture I took in Milan, Italy on the 24th December 2016. And honestly, it's not one of the highlights of my hometown. It's just the view I had from the balcony of a friend's place where I stayed when I last went to Milan. The thing is, I don't have my own place anymore there because I've lived abroad for over a decade. And if you're curious, I now live in the Azores on Pico Island, right in the mid-Atlantic. So, this tutorial is gonna be more about my general workflow in Lightroom than the picture itself. Anyway, if you're interested in the story behind the shot, you will find a link to my blog in the description of this video, and if you're curious, these buildings are called Torri Richard Towers in English, also known as Torri del Naviglio. Alright then, let's get started. What you see here is the original RAW file, and I think you agree it's greatly underexposed. To show you that it's really the original file, I click reset a couple of times, and there is actually something I did already on this picture, and that was fixing the verticals, because they were completely off in the original file, and I fixed them to give you a better comparison between the before and after. So in order to do that, I scroll down to the transform panel, and here I simply click vertical. Okay, that's much better. Ooh, interesting also. Let me undo this. Please notice that before I fixed the verticals, there was a red arrow here on the left part of the histogram telling me that I clipped the red channel. When I fixed the verticals, the arrow disappears. So that's a good reason to do the cropping before you do anything else, at least in this case. Because, you know, like this, we got rid of a very dark part of the image, and I wouldn't have liked to work taking that part into account, because then in the end I'm gonna get rid of it. So I'm gonna work better on the contrast and color grading by doing the cropping at the beginning of my workflow. Anyway, now if I scroll up just a little bit more, I will find the lens corrections panel. And here I want to do two things. The first thing is enable profile correction, and here under lens profile I have to choose my lens, which is a Tamron, and then you see that the actual lens that I used is set, and that was a Tamron 70-300 4-5.6 USD. Just for you to know, I'm an APS-C shooter, and I use a Sony A77 Mark II, which is about €1,000, and this lens I think it's about 300 to 350 euros. I will show you at the very end of the tutorial another picture I took with this lens, just to make the point that you don't need super expensive gear in order to be successful with your photography. The second thing that I want to do in the lens corrections panel is check remove chromatic aberration in case there is any, and then I will go all the way back to the basic panel. And this is where I normally start my workflow in Lightroom. So we said the picture is underexposed, but that was on purpose, as I wanted to capture every bit of detail, I mean texture and color in the sky, something you cannot do if you clip the highlights. And what I mean by this is, well, I'll give you an example. Imagine if I shot this image like this. You see now that you have an arrow here. I could even go higher than that. Now some parts of the image are completely white, which means those parts do not contain any information anymore that you can recover in post. So on the other hand, you see that I did not clip the shadows, which means that all the information is here, although you can't see it in the raw file. That's why post-processing is so important. So the first thing I want to do is increase the exposure by about, I don't know, let's say 1.5 stops. And then the second thing, and this moves, please notice, the whole histogram to the right. I'll do it again. If I increase the exposure, you see the entire histogram has moved to the right. The second thing I want to do is open the shadows, and when I do that, you will see that I'm just moving the dark part of the image to the right. Let's do it to an extreme value of +100, which I rarely use, but for the sake of this tutorial, I want you to see a big difference, especially here on YouTube. And now the problem is that the sky got too bright. So to counteract that, I will turn down the highlights. I'll be extreme once again to -100, and then we recovered a lot of information in the image. There's a problem though, because now the image looks washed out. And of course it does, because by opening the shadows, we moved the left side of the histogram to the right, which means that we made what was dark a lot brighter, and by bringing down the highlights, we made the brightest part of the image darker. So we sort of squeezed the histogram towards the midtones. Both sides of the histogram were squeezed towards the center. And this is why we lost such a great deal of contrast. Luckily, there is a quick fix to this. And in order to restore contrast, we have to make sure that some parts of the image are completely white, and some, even, some tiny bits of the image are completely black. And we will be using these two sliders, the white slider and the black slider. So to restore contrast, I'm gonna do the following. I'll press Alt and then click on the white slider, and then I move the slider to the right until I see some color appear on the screen. In this case, some red here in the left part of the image. So the problem with this is that now we have clipped the highlights. So I'll press Alt again, I'll click the white slider again, and then I'll back off until that red disappears. You will see some white still in the lower part of the image, but those are street lights, and street lights are supposed to be very bright, so I don't care if we clip them. It's okay with me. Now we will do the same thing with the black slider. I'll press Alt and click the slider, and then I'll move to the opposite direction. So I'll move to the left until I see something appear. Maybe this is a little bit too much, so I'll back off and then release the slider. And now we actually have restored the contrast. Next up is the white balance. I have to say that I'm pretty happy with the white balance of my image, but let's try a few other options. This is as shot. Let's try auto. Oh, awful, it's too blue. Daylight, still a little bit too blue. Let's try the options that make the image warmer, such as cloudy. Yeah, not bad. Let's try shade, even warmer. Yeah, it's okay, but you know what? I leave it as shot. It's the best option for me. Another thing that I want to do in the basic panel is increase the clarity a little bit. The clarity slider is very useful because it allows you to add contrast just to the midtones if you move the slider to the right. In that case, I very rarely go above 20, but let's see, for this image, sort of 12 will be enough. Of course, you can also go the other direction to the left and you remove contrast from the midtones. Well, it doesn't really work for this image, so let me stick to 12. And then what I want to do is go all the way down and check, for instance, the camera calibration. You remember that I told you that I wanted to, change the colors a little bit in my image, but I didn't want to use the white balance. I'm, sticking to the as shot option. Here in the camera calibration panel, you have several color profiles, and the default is Adobe Standard, which is very good. but you have other profiles. For instance, I like camera standard, which normally makes the picture a little bit more saturated, but in this case I see too much yellow in the sky. Camera vivid is another good option, and it makes, guess what, your image is more vivid. Let's see, even more yellow, so I don't really like it very much. Then you have camera neutral. Camera neutral is the best option for me when I also work on my images in Photoshop. In this tutorial I will stick to Lightroom, but when I think my images are important, I do the first part of my post-processing in Lightroom, and then I complete it in Photoshop. And in that case, camera neutral gives me a lot of leverage, fine-tuning the contrast. Then you also have camera landscape. Camera landscape, ooh, yeah, not bad, but still a little bit too yellow. This is the profile I use the most when I have a lot of green in my image, which is not the case here, because it makes the green even more lush, and I love that. Here I think that the image will greatly benefit from another profile, which is camera deep, and indeed I actually like that very much. And you know why? Because, you know, it sort of darkens a little bit the image, but making the sky in this case a lot nicer, but still keeping this sort of grungy look in, you know, the railway and this part of the city. So I'll stick to camera deep. Then I scroll up again, and here you find the effects panel, and the only thing I'm gonna play with is the dehaze slider. I love the dehaze slider because it adds a very special contrast. I don't really know how the algorithm works for this, but it's very pleasant, and once again I never go crazy with it, but something like +9 I think really does the job. You can remove haze from your images if you use positive values. On the other hand, if you move the slider to the left, you actually add haze to your pictures. So we said, yeah, +9 is good. Then I go up again, and transform panel, we already worked on it. Then we have the lens correction panel done already. And then we find the detail panel. This is very important to sharpen your images and to remove noise. And the first thing I normally do is noise removal. You have two types of noise that can affect your pictures: the luminance noise and the color noise. Color noise, I have a default of 25, which I think it's good, but more than thinking that it's good, you know, I know that I'll show you some exit information. I press I, and you see that I shot this picture in 1/4 of a second at f10 ISO 100. So I knew, and by the way, if I press I again, you see that this is a 6000 by 4000 picture. Indeed, my camera features a 24 megapixel sensor, and I didn't do any cropping. And then I press I again to make all the information disappear. Having shot the picture at ISO 100, you know, I'm not expecting a lot of noise, but what I really want to do is zoom in 100% and check the shadow areas of my image. I see that it's not noisy at all, or not very noisy. And so for color, the default of 25 is good to me. And luminance, I don't want to lose a lot of details, so about 10 or 12 will be enough. And let me zoom out. Yeah, I think it's good. And then I want to go up still in the detail panel and sharpen my image. Since it's not very noisy, I think I can safely go up, you know, between 70 and 80, and this is the amount slider to be applied to the image. Then I have the radius slider. 1 is good to me. A value of 1 sounds good to me. Sometimes I go as low as 0.9. Sometimes I go as high as +2. Detail 25%, that's okay. And then I have the masking slider. And this is very important because I don't want to apply the sharpening to the entire image. For instance, I don't want any sharpening to be applied to the sky. So what I do is I press Alt and click the masking slider, and then I move the slider to the right. You see that when you start, it's completely white, which means that sharpening is applied to the entire image. It's like the masks in Photoshop, you know, just to remember, white reveals and black conceals. So as I move the slider to the right, you see that some parts of the image become black, so the sharpening is not applied there. And I keep moving until I see that no sharpening is applied to the sky. So this value, in this case 38, it depends on the image of course, is good to me. So I just let go, and okay. So the image is now also sharpened. Let me see, we go up again, we have the split toning panel. I rarely use this panel, but you know what, I forgot something. And yeah, I could just, you know, redo the video, but I'm not gonna do that. I forgot to do something down here in actually the camera calibration panel, because I like camera deep, but I think the sky should be a little bit more red. And here you also have some sliders, red primary, green primary, and blue primary. Funnily enough, to make the sky more red, I rarely tweak the hue and saturation of the red primary sliders. Green I touch very rarely, but blue, if I move the slider, the hue slider of the blue primary to the left, you will see that the sky gets more red. And a value of about 18, I think it's good for me. Then I have a saturation slider. Very interesting, all the saturation sliders in the camera calibration panel let you go up to pretty crazy values, which is not the case with the saturation slider in the basic panel, with which you create artifacts in your picture if you go above, let's say, plus 40. And please notice, I haven't touched the vibrance and saturation sliders in the basic panel because I think the image is colorful enough. So here I think that maybe a saturation around 20, 22 is good enough. So as I said, let's go up again. Split toning panel, I'm not going to do anything here. Then we have a hue, saturation, luminance panel. You can increase the hue or the saturation of the luminance of, you know, single colors, or I'll do another tutorial on this. Just, you know, the picture is colorful enough. I'm not going to do anything here. And then I have the tone curve panel. Here you find a set of very specialized sliders that let you target tones more specifically than the shadows and highlights sliders of the basic panel. Highlights, I'm not going to touch them, but maybe the lights, I want to make them a little bit brighter. Plus 11 sounds, let me see, maybe a little bit more. Plus 14 looks good to me. Then I have the darks, and maybe I want, you know, I should really tell you what regions we are targeting. If I mouse over the highlights slider, you will see, let me show you the panel like this. You will see that we will be targeting the brightest part of the image, you know, from the complete white values down to the pretty bright midtones. Then if we target the lights, it's a much broader selection, from the extreme right of the histogram all the way to the, you know, pretty dark midtones. Then we have the darks, and we go from the deepest shadows, you know, you see it on the graph. And then we have the shadows, which are really the darkest parts of the image. So with the darks, I think the picture is a little bit too dark, so I'll open them up a little bit, maybe even around 12. But now, since I sort of opened up the shadows again, the darks again, I don't want to lose contrast, so I will actually bring down the shadows a little bit. Let's say -7 looks good to me. Let's move up again, and then we find again the basic panel. So we are pretty much done. There are just another couple of things that I want to do on this image. I think the sky is a little bit too bright up here, and to darken it, I'm not gonna use any general sliders, but I'm gonna use a graduated filter, which I'm gonna drop onto the top of the image following the profile of the buildings. And yes, this value of minus 0.31 exposure actually looks good to me. Now, as a very last thing, I want to draw the attention more towards the center of the image, so I want to brighten it, and I can use a radial filter for that, which I select here. Please make sure when you use a radial filter that the invert mask is checked, because we want to brighten things inside the radial circle and not outside. So let's apply it here. And maybe I'll lower it a little bit, and I will increase the exposure to, let's say, maybe 0.34. And another thing that I want to do is increase the clarity just inside the radial filter. A value of about 11 looks good to me. And let me have a last look at the image. After 20 minutes, probably my eyes are tired, but if I look at the histogram up here, I see that, you know, the highlights are not really touching the border on the right. So, you know what I am gonna do? I'll further increase the whites to a value of about 54, and I think I'm happier with this. So, let's check the before and after. This is the before, and this is the after. That's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial, and ciao for now.